have to understand, if it turns out that the information we're going off of is correct, that means there's a whole group of Americans out there believing incorrect information. One person who believes that their old belief system was wrong was kind enough and brave enough to willingly step into an area, right, Cha, that's way more progressive than they are, and explain to us in their own words what happened with their political journey. It is Portable Orange, and by the way, I'm now a subscriber to his channel because I love history channels, and he does a heck of a good job. This is the pre-recorded interview with him, and then after that, so y'all are ready. We're hoping to talk with more General Strike people. These folks from Southern California, and they're going to tell us how we can use worker power to protect victims of ICE kidnappings, a thing that is crucially important in this day and age. Without further ado, Portable Orange. Watching WYCD on this space, that stands for What You Can Do. And today, we're talking with Andrew, aka Port, the Portable Orange, from Portable Orange, a YouTube channel I came across recently. And the man has a story that I think would be valuable for you to hear. Andrew, how are you, sir?
Good. How you doing, Jake?
I'm doing pretty well. Recently, I came across a video of yours that I think tells the other side of a story that myself and to a degree my own audience have participated in, maybe in ways that maybe we meant well but we're not proud of. And that is the division between people based on politics. Can you give us just a recap of that video of what your story with politics is?
I made a video for my channel after the 2020 election because I noticed a lot of my friends just on Facebook and social media seemed to be kind of at a loss for how it had happened. And I think a lot of people felt somewhat blindsided by it. And I was someone who, from a very young age, had been sort of more right-leaning, kind of a very traditional conservative Bush-era Republican. And then as I grew and went to college and met more people, I got a bit more liberal, and I eventually moved into more like a Bernie bro type. But after Bernie, I'd actually found that I had drifted towards Trump. And I supported him through 2016, voted for him in the state of California, so my vote definitely counted. And then was really kind of fighting with a lot of my old, more liberal friends about Trump and his policies, which I think in many ways, through my own fault as well, we just ended up drifting apart as a result of those differences. And what ended up happening was, without kind of a network of friends around me, I was turning to more online spaces. And a lot of those online spaces are a little bit more radical than just Trump supporters. And I actually did end up drifting quite a bit further to the right than even Donald Trump, to the point where there was a time where I was straight up kind of spewing Holocaust denial. And eventually, thanks to my wonderful aunt, who was kind of there for me through all of it, I was able to, through conversations, work my way back. And so the video was sort of my way of trying to show that someone with good intentions can end up in a really, really bad place. But just because someone's in that place, it doesn't mean they're completely unreachable, and that we necessarily have to go blood in the streets about everything.
Was it the wooden doors on the gas chambers that was the issue she asked you about when she said, "Where did you hear that?"
Yeah, so my aunt specifically asked me about this one element of Holocaust denial, which is quite popular actually, where wooden doors are referenced, in that the gas chambers, specifically at Auschwitz, were made of wood. And of course, wood is not airtight. And so therefore, how could they have been gas chambers? Because, you know, there's nothing airtight about them. However, if you actually look into it, you can find A, the Nazis specifically requesting wooden doors with a rubber seal, and B, most people already know that you don't actually need something to be airtight to kill someone with a gas. What I tell people is, if they're skeptical, go ahead and sit in your garage with the car on and see what happens. And so that initial question caused me to look into that, because I'd only seen it from memes. I think specifically there's a screen cap from Paulie, a character from The Sopranos, going, "Hey, Tone, you telling me they had wooden doors?" And actually looking into the evidence as opposed to just telling someone, "Well, how could there possibly be wooden doors? That doesn't make sense." That sort of kicked off a chain reaction of then me looking up, there's another one that the population of Jews didn't actually decline after World War II, based on one population study that the study itself acknowledges the numbers are from pre-World War II, because World War II populations changed quite a lot due to war, and record keeping wasn't the best, so they didn't have a lot of records to pull from. Certain things like that then sort of made me realize that I'd been so wrong about this, and sort of ended up unraveling what, to me at least at the time, was a fairly consistent worldview, and eventually led me to, I guess, liberal. I don't know if labels mean anything. Probably not a leftist. If you're a leftist, you probably don't like me, but definitely not far right anymore, at the very least.
Well, that's the thing. I think the umbrella of this whole conversation is to recognize the difference between somebody you disagree with politically and somebody who has bad intentions for people you care about. And I simply, if the truth of it is that there's 70 million people on the other side that disagree so much about what is good or evil, just to be blunt. If that's really what's going on, then there is no hope. But it simply can't be. I think we have to do our part to make sure we're not on the other side of that. We're acting more like your aunt and less like your friend group that said, we disagree, we're just not friends no more. That doesn't seem practical.
I do think my friends were getting a lot of flack, especially in the comments of that video and in general. And I do think it was for the best, probably, that we drifted away. I think I was very argumentative. I definitely fought with them a lot. And I think one of the difficult things, and specifically something I was trying to get across in my video, is people need to be willing to change. There are a lot of curious people that just go down the wrong rabbit holes, and you can get them out of there. But there are also people where it's important for them, that's their identity. And I think it's a lot harder to have conversations with those people. And I think the place I was in when I lost my friend group in that instance, I think they kind of made the right call. There was a lot I cut from my video. One of them was about sort of my difficulties dating in Los Angeles as a pretty far right guy. And I even threw a joke in where I was like, which good call, ladies, And I think it's because I think it's easy to look at me now that I'm on the other side and say, oh, well, how could they have done this? But I do think that it's a lot harder sometimes than we like to acknowledge some of these conversations. And there are also times where walking away, honestly, is the right call, and focusing on other people that might be in a position that you can reach, rather than just the person who happens to be in front of you at that moment.
Is part of it that at that moment there is nothing that could have been said to reach you, and it just, there needed to be another moment? Or is it that whatever, like, they just didn't know what to say?
That's tough, actually. Certainly they didn't know what to say, which I don't fault them for. I mean,
none of us do.
Yeah, and I think too, the thing about, granted, when I lost my friends, I was nowhere near the Holocaust denial levels. I was basically just, Trump's good, we should support Trump. That was about as far right as I was. I think probably more what it was I had some concerns, and when I would talk to them, I would feel as though those concerns were not really addressed. I think with Trump, one of the big things was that I wanted immigration reform, because I felt like people coming to the country illegally was a bad system. I don't think that anymore, but I would say that at the time that was fairly tame. Like, I was fine with giving these people a path to citizenship. If anything, I was mad at Obama for the Dreamer thing, for not just giving them the actual path rather than just deferring it. So there were potentially ways that maybe they could have reached me, but I think that, especially the kind of person I was at the time, it was cool for me to have an opinion other people didn't have. And I think that it would have been tricky for them to navigate those types of conversations with who I was at that time. Maybe you're right. Maybe I did need to wait a bit. Maybe I needed to get a little worse before I could get better in a way. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that one before. That one's a little tricky.
How did isolation affect your political views?
To me, in a weird way, I wasn't isolated. I just found a new friend group because I think humans are social creatures. And to me, at a certain point, friends on the internet were just the same as friends in real life because I could play video games with them. We could all hop on League together. We could kind of play these various multiplayer games together and chat while we were doing it. And it was just sort of a way to hang out. And so to me, I never really, the isolation for me actually came when I left the far right because, my friends didn't want me back. And obviously the far right didn't want me at that point. So that's really when I was isolated because the far right, as much as people don't want to admit it, is fairly welcoming if you'll just agree to these tenets of theirs. Like the buy-in is rather low. And frankly, most extremes have that. It's really not just the far right. But the exclusion that I think is projected outwards, a lot of times those communities don't actually engage in as long as you're willing to be like a useful idiot or something like that. Like Candace Owens is a good example of this. Or Kanye West. Kanye West is a much better example, right? This is a black man, so therefore the far right is not going to like him for, genetic reasons, but they're happy that he's kind of getting their message out of anti-Semitism. And so in a way, they're going to be welcoming to him. Now, they're not really friends and they will cast him aside at the first opportunity, as we saw, but it's interesting just the way you asked that, because to me, I didn't feel isolated until I left the far right, because I had a new, fairly welcoming group of friends that was like, good job, bud. You've done the research. You've seen through the lies. And, now you can get welcome to the special club that knows the truth.
What convinced you to support the far right? Was it a specific argument, or was it something that was presented to you as a fact that you took to be true?
As much as I feel like I'd come off a lot better in this if I say here was the specific argument, but it was a lot more insidious than that. It was kind of a slow process. It was, first I'm like, hey, build a wall. Walls are cool. I'd like to have a wall. And genuinely my analysis ended at walls are cool. And then from there, the community of people pushing for the wall suddenly get to the point of, we need the wall because we need to preserve the culture of America. And then I'm like, of course we need to preserve the culture of America. I love the culture of this country. And then it goes to, okay, we need to preserve the culture of this country, and who really started the culture of that country? And it's like, well, we're a country of immigrants, so really it was a bunch of people. Slowly, eventually, you end up at this place where, without even realizing it, you suddenly have a position of America should be a white nation, and it's almost not clear to you how you got there. And I don't know that it was clear to me at the time. It's something that I think if you'd asked me at the time if I had always held those positions, I probably would have said yes, that I'd had those positions my whole life. And I think the interesting thing is, even if you look at the comments of my video, a lot of far-right people under those comments are claiming they've never changed their position once. When I think we know they didn't grow up in these types of environments, or if they did, they're a very small number of people, because these just weren't common opinions in like the 80s and 90s, maybe in the Deep South or something. But for most people, these wouldn't have been common opinions, and they've kind of emerged from these internet communities.
It is a fascinating point, particularly about opinions being changed one issue at a time, like in increments. Because you're right, it's just like the folks that say, "Oh, I'm not racist," even though it's 1884 and they're fighting for the Confederacy. Like, there's this, insidious is a good word. There's this way that political interests have of one way of phrasing things at a time shift the whole conversation. You went essentially from, let's say, this side to way over here to some. That means you must have crossed by some of the same issues a couple of times.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have any issue you remember looking at it one way from one side and thinking one way about it, and then thinking the opposite at the other? And what was it?
Yeah, 100%. Economics for sure, mostly healthcare and unions. I think growing up, it was very much profit incentive. We need to make sure that the healthcare system stays privatized and more money is introduced to the system, so that the people who are within that system will be encouraged to create cures and vaccines and stuff because they want to make a bunch of money off of it. And in some ways, we sort of saw that with COVID, although the profit came from the government funding them. So go figure.
Yeah.
But then when I kind of was talking to my friends about healthcare, because I grew up somewhat wealthy, actually. And like every wealthy person, because my friends were wealthier than me, I thought I grew up quite middle class. And then when I went to college and actually met the kids of middle class and working class families, I was like, oh, I actually had a very fortunate life. And some of these kids had never gone to the dentist because it was just too expensive. And, you know, their parents worked a part-time job. And so they didn't have like dental insurance. And I was like, oh, wow, maybe we should sort of, you know, get like a national healthcare system going. This was after Obama, so I guess it already existed by that point. But suddenly I was like more in favor of that. And then during Bernie, I was like, you know what, single payer, totally 100% should be the government all the way. There should be no private insurance whatsoever. And then when I kind of went back to the far right, one of the buy-ins there is, there is room actually in the far right for healthcare systems, NASBOLs, if anyone's familiar with that. These people who are kind of like communist Nazis, you know, communism, but only for white people. But for me, it was, you know, capitalism. And so therefore I went back to the profit incentive, but even more extreme, to the point of like, look, I'm sorry, if you die because you can't afford healthcare, that's just, you know, that's what you got to do because this is just the best system we can produce. And we just got to shovel bodies into the machine to get better cures for stuff.
So are you saying that you believed when you were on the conservative side of things, the more conservative side, your belief was that the healthcare function, or the U.S. healthcare functioned or needed to be set up the way it is set up in order to function for those that it works for as well as it does? Is that accurate to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't even know I was thinking about it that deeply, but yeah, sure. So then from there, when I started doing more research, I realized that the excess spending in healthcare from not having a sort of a safety net, you know, sort of just like some sort of universal healthcare system, really costs taxpayers a lot, and that profit doesn't really end up in the hands of people who are working on cures. Like if anything, you can sort of argue it ends up in hospitals, but at the end of the day, it ends up with collection agencies. That's what it really ends up with, because if people can't pay their bills, the only people who are making money off that are going to be the collection agencies that the hospital sells the debt to, and they're going to sell that debt at probably pretty close to a loss. So where I eventually came around to was a public option, where now I describe myself as like, healthcare should be pretty much for everyone, but I shouldn't be paying for Jeff Bezos's healthcare. So perhaps there should be a certain cutoff where we still are able to keep some sort of a private system, but that for the most part, the vast majority of people who are in this country should be covered, and the government and us through our taxes necessarily should be paying for that type of a system. So that's definitely one of the best examples of me jumping all over the place.
During the early Trump years, you were on that side. You were for Trump. Then, in part because your friend group changed based on that political view, you actually went much further to the right, to the point where you were against Trump because you believed he was a half measure, essentially. At that point, you spoke with your aunt and you had that life-changing conversation, and then the true isolation began. Is that the correct order of events?
Yeah, it was actually pretty quick. I probably shouldn't even say their name, but there's a very right-wing animated sketch comedy show that involved Wojaks, and people will know what I'm talking about if they know what I'm talking about. And I remember, I think in like 2017 almost, we were already talking about if you already knew how bad things really are. And pretty quickly it became that Trump was a puppet of the Jews, the globalist deep state, and that he was moving the embassy to Israel, or Jerusalem, sorry. We already had one in Israel. But he was moving it to Jerusalem. He was, signing off on the Golan Heights. I'm pretty sure that was around that time. He was doing all these things, and therefore he was very much the puppet of the Jews. And so therefore he wasn't on our side, and he wasn't far enough to protect, again, that white culture of America from the white people who built this country. And then from there, just because those communities I was a part of, I started getting a lot further down the rabbit hole. And then I started having conversations, not just with my aunt, but actually other members of my family who were getting uncomfortable. And there were several gatherings where I was explicitly told I was not allowed to talk politics. And I think it was 2018, so maybe like 2 years, maybe early 2019, somewhere in that range, that I was talking with my aunt about Trump pretty regularly, because the media did kind of lie about some of the stuff Trump was saying. Like there was a lot of stuff that was put forward that if you looked at what he had said, it was kind of a bad way to spin it. The very fine people stuff is brought up all the time, that he was calling the white nationalists very fine people, when he explicitly says, I don't mean the white nationalists, and literally the very next thing. And so that those conversations were stuff I was having with my aunt, because she was a, dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. And so we would just kind of talk politics with each other. And then from there, I started saying to her, like, oh, there's some other stuff you might want to look into, and kind of trying to drop red pills, the JQ kind of stuff. And probably, it was late 2018, early 2019, somewhere in there was where she just asked me, like, well, where did you read this? For the wooden doors thing specifically was what I was talking to her about. That set me down my rabbit hole. And definitely by, I don't know if it was by 2020 specifically, but certainly by January 6th, I specifically remember watching them breaking into the Capitol. This is going to be so cringe. I remember watching them breaking into the Capitol and saying, fuck Trump, for the first time, which is just such a cringe thing to say, honestly. But I remember that was the first time I was like, I'm completely done with this man, was January 6th. That was the first time I went that far. Yeah.
It sounds to me like until she had asked you for a specific source for that argument that you wanted to put her way, essentially, you were satisfied with it just being taught. Like, you were satisfied to accept it as a fact simply because it was being discussed already as a fact. Like entering in halfway through a conversation and just continuing with the conversation. And the thing that made you go back to the beginning of that conversation, is this true, was somebody else who you were trying to convince, saying, okay, show me where you saw that.
I think largely, but again, I do think there's more of an issue where in those spaces, a lot of times what you end up with, again, is the kind of distribution of memes. And so I had seen things that to me were fairly clear evidence. Like, again, the Jewish population numbers after World War II. You can Google this right now and find the exact image that gets shared around. And thankfully, these days, if you Google it, right next to it will be someone disproving it with the uncropped image that shows the little note that says, by the way, these numbers are from, I think it's 38, but definitely earlier than the war. And then someone else might even share the version that they published in 48, which did show that decline. These things, I think, you're just overwhelmed with so many of them that eventually you get to the point where you've seen the documents and you've seen the journals and the sources, to where, to me, I had done research. I genuinely, in my own mind, was very, very well read on this. And so therefore was comfortable engaging in these types of conversations, because I knew the document existed. Yeah, of course I didn't have it on me, but I knew for a fact I could find those images and I'd be able to pull this up. And even when I looked for the wooden doors thing, the first website I found was just someone saying, yeah, isn't this BS? And I was like, no, I want to find actually like someone saying the wooden door thing, or photos or something. And that's when I found that website that was, which, boy, I should really be giving them a shout out right now. I swear it's like, it's HC is the initials. It's Holocaust something. But they were the ones who had kind of this long document going through and explaining where the wooden doors thing had come from, how it was used to kind of like push this myth that didn't exist, and some of the explanations for it. And that's kind of the moment when I was like, oh, so is it a good thing to say to people to get them out of it? I think the problem is they have to be curious. Because again, for a lot of these people, they have done the research. And so if you say your research is wrong, they're just going to say no. Or like I run into a lot when I talk to people about this online, they'll just jump to the next thing. Plenty of people in my comments will say, yeah, of course the wooden doors thing is fake, but you're missing this thing. You're missing this thing. And then I'll, talk about that one and they'll say, okay, well, those two things are fake, but here's a third thing. And they're just going to go down the list because all they need is a single inconsistency. And neither of you are going to sit there long enough to go through every single thing that they know. So I don't actually think that's necessarily the best way to do it.
Well, that's intriguing, especially what you said about essentially instilling curiosity. It's less about proving that they're wrong in the moment and more about getting them to examine their own beliefs in any way. Have you noticed any patterns among sources of information that you no longer believe?
One thing is I've been very removed from those sources for a while now, because again, this was at this point, what are we in 2025? This was almost 7 years ago now at this point. And most of my engagement with sources these days is only to kind of debunk them in a sense. And so most of the patterns I do find are just things that, again, they're like cropped or usually if someone shows you an image but won't provide you a link, that's usually a bit of a red flag for me. The rest of my channel, by the way, for anyone listening to this, I'm actually not a politics YouTube channel. The rest of my channel is a lot about doing kind of deep dives on historical research. And part of the reason I started doing that was actually because of this experience where I found that when you kind of track stuff down to the primary sources, you can find a lot of stuff that people will try and spin in various ways because you can take a single sentence out of context or what have you. Sure. So I would say if someone will just give you an image and then if you ask them for a source, they just like name a book or something, like they couldn't even tell you where they got the image from. That is something that I think is a bit of a red flag. But I don't know that there actually are that many patterns because I think for the most part it is sort of playing whack-a-mole. So as one pattern can be identified, it'll just be abandoned and a new one will take its place.
Who benefits when friends argue, when family argues, when there's this discord between us? Who comes out on top?
It's easy to look at a lot of what's going on with the far right, not just today in America, but really across most of Europe and other parts of the globe, and see it as like someone is driving something, that there is some shadow group that is pulling the strings and trying to get people to believe these things. I personally don't think that's what's happening. You'll find some people, I mean, there's like Andrew Tate, there are people who have a monetary incentive to spew these things. Alex Jones, David Icke, frankly, like there's people who will spew these things that are making money off it. But I think for the most part, the people who benefit are the people who are already in those communities. Because something that I go into a little bit in my video is you often feel like when you're in these spaces, I should say, you feel like you have a lot of concerns that the rest of the world is completely ignoring. So if you genuinely do believe that there is a like culture to America and that culture is genuinely white, and you go up to someone and say, hey, listen, we need to make like white culture forefront and center of America. And they say, oh, I don't care about that. Like, I think America's culture isn't tied to the color of your skin. That's going to feel like such a rejection of something that you care deeply about that it's going to drive you further into those spaces. Not saying that people should suddenly start saying, you're right, we should have a white American culture. But I think that like the people who benefit from starting these fights, the people who are pushing this ideology are the people who've already bought into it. It's sort of like like a perpetual motion machine or some sort of like sustaining cult mentality. It's not necessarily like, again, some sort of shadowy people who are trying to push some sort of agenda so they can come in and do something. I just think it's people in the community wanting to not feel crazy.
Do you have advice for how communities can talk amongst themselves about sensitive stuff like politics?
Yeah, I think for sure. I've had a lot of success actually with talking to people on the right. And I think a big part of the way is that I'm able to talk in a language that they can understand. So like immigration is actually an excellent example of this. A lot of times when you talk to people on the right about immigration, it's, well, they broke the law, they shouldn't be here. And I think if you frame it as, well, these people want a better life, you could sort of end up opening a conversation. One of the tricky things is you need to know where to go from there, because you really do have to understand sort of the worldview of the other side, because they're probably going to say, well, it doesn't matter, they can wait in line like everyone else. And then you can sort of say, well, I think that waiting in line is good, but our system is fundamentally broken. And I think we can agree we should be sending more money to border control. I just think that we should be using it to streamline the process. We should make sure that we have more immigration judges. We have an easier way for these people who want a better life to come here and work in this country legally. And something like that I find resonates with people a lot more than just saying no human being is illegal, or borders are made up, it doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter that they broke the law, they're looking for a better life. But again, the tricky thing is you need to understand sort of the worldview they're coming from. And a lot of times when you're talking to someone like that, they're not just going to, offer it themselves. So I guess my biggest piece of advice would be first kind of ask them like what's the goal you're trying to achieve, or what necessarily do you want out of this policy? And then from there, I think you can move into ways to try and craft something that within their worldview can still allow for maybe sort of a median policy, or something that's not quite as extreme.
Andrew, it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. Where can people check out your content?
You can check me out at Portable Orange on YouTube, and that is it. I am trying to work on other social media, but that is all I have for the moment. I mostly do deep dives on historical content. For the most part, I have done Rome up until now. I did a very fun video on sexuality in Rome and kind of what a lot of primary sources have to say for that. I have over 140 primary sources linked in a companion document so that you can go through the sources yourself and see if you agree or disagree with me. So stop by. We'd love to have you.
That was Port, the Portable Orange. I really enjoy his channel. It is a history channel, not a politics channel, but I appreciated his insight today. I think especially when it came to things like, talking about Medicare for all in language they will appreciate. It's not to hide the ball. It's not to hide our intentions, but to express the full range of our intentions, because our intentions are not just to help this group or that group. They absolutely are to help whichever those groups are, but they're to help everybody. And if that is true, we should be able to make that case in any way, from any angle it's asked for, in any way that it's asked for. Fascinating interview, fascinating guy. I really enjoyed him.
Watch this